Silence, everyone.
We were
There was no talking at all.
no response. In fact, one of the interesting things for me was to look at the witnesses and the family members, especially, who just seemed very, very stoic.
Yeah.
They watched it. Some turned to the others. They looked, a slight nod. They looked back, and it was over. No emotion apparent whatsoever.
How about among you? Is there anybody among the panel here that has a particularly strong reaction to this?
It happened so quickly, and because of the shade, we saw everything in silhouette until he dropped through, then no movement. It's hard to know what to react to. There wasn't anything more dramatic than the actual dropping through of the body.
I thought the anticipation, or whatever it is, was far worse than the event itself.
Yes.
Because it did sort of happen.
Of the orange jumpsuit and the black hood are going to stay with me for quite a while.
There was a very eerie feeling in that room for the 6 or 8 or 10 minutes before there was anything going on. It was absolutely silent except for the sound of reporters writing in our notepads and turning the pages. There was a whir in the background, sort of like an electrical hum that we could hear, almost like wind through a tunnel, but in a distance. And other than that, there was silence.
Part of what contributes to that eerie feeling is the light in the room is subdued. It's nothing like this. The light's very dim, and it is almost, I guess the best word would be otherworldly. And the silhouette is dim.
The other thing is, he did drop such a short distance that I was sitting on the front row in the center, and I had to lean over and look up to see his hood, and even then I could not see the top of his head, just about halfway up the hood. So he fell through the door, and again, we weren't even sure if he cleared it, but it seems he did, but barely. And if that's due to the size of the body and the length of the rope or whatever the calculations involved there are, he didn't have a long ways to fall.
You should probably, I don't think anyone's mentioned that the victims' family members all wore a white carnation, 2 white ribbons.
Sorry, what?
White carnation, each had a white carnation and 2 white ribbons.
Little ribbons.
Oh, hanging.
Yeah. On their lapels. They were wearing
all three of the victims' relatives.
It also appeared to me that Renee Wickland's sister, her eyes, there were tears welling in her eyes moments afterwards.
Although we're talking, someone mentioned that James Loveson seemed to be visibly shaken. When we entered the room, he had his head in his hands. His head was down at his knees and his face held like that. So he looked like he was very upset. He never spoke, though.
He also looked like he was a portrait of exhaustion.
Yes.
Just see the man hadn't slept probably in a week, and that the hanging was devastating for him. It clearly devastating for him.
I guess no one mentioned it. Ms. Wood announced over the microphone Mr. Campbell has declined to give any last words, sort of officially. Right after the death was announced, there's a little phone in the room with a little green light on it, and the green light went on, and Veltri announced to us, if I can ever find it,
The execution of Charles Rodman Campbell is complete.
By
You left
hanging.
out the words by hanging. The execution of Charles Rodman Campbell by hanging has been completed.
Yes.
Another thing we should probably mention is that we had been warned that the superintendent might make the decision, if he was appearing to struggle, that she might make the decision not to allow him a final statement, but we were told that it was his decision not to make a final statement to any of us. So that was not made for him. He decided on his own not to make a
You
statement.
should also know that after we get done, Seth Dawson, the Snohomish County prosecutor, has some words to make.
Yeah.
We were also asked not to speak to any of the family members.
And they left immediately. As soon as they were allowed, they got up and left.
Yeah, right after the pronouncement of death.
Actually, that's not quite true.
They waited.
No, he said I think he's sitting back there and he's going to talk to us after we're done.
The only other comment I might make is that this entire process that we're talking about, from the very first we heard her speak that Mr. Campbell has declined to give any last words until the final curtain was down, was about 2.5, at the most 3 minutes.
Very,
Seemed to be
very quick.
this endless delay when you're waiting where they were, what's going on. And then they showed up, and then it just happened. I guess because I was worried about a deadline.
Does anyone on the panel think this was a cruel and unusual punishment?
I think you would be hard pressed to say that it looked cruel and unusual. It looked instantaneous. Death appeared to be quick, and there was no sign of struggle. I would add that his hands and feet, he was so tightly bound and tied to a board that it may have been impossible to see movement even if it was there, but to all appearances, it was that quick.
I mean, we don't, as I said before, I'm not in his shoes, so I don't know.
And really, literally, we had like 30 seconds to view him, and there's a lot of stuff that was going on, trying to see, and I can't tell you, I did not see signs of suffering, but I saw some portion of 30 seconds before the curtain dropped, and
we saw very little.
Yeah.
As far as
He
cruel,
was still-
probably not. The question is whether hanging a man while he's bound to a board with his hands and feet, if that's unusual, I don't know.
There was still movement when they closed the curtains. He hadn't stilled. So we don't know what would have happened, what did happen in the next minute.
Twisting his board.
Turning.
Yeah. There was movement,
Sort of like
yeah.
slowly
That was from
clockwise.
Not from his body, but from
Not bodily
board.
movement, but the overall
board.
form.
And the other thing is there was a certain amount of time, if you figure out the math, before they declared him dead. We didn't see it. After they closed the curtains, after a while, you could hear like sounds of like furniture moving,
Scraping
people
sounds.
going around. We were told because he had the clothes he had on, essentially 2 sets of clothes, it took some time, I would imagine, is to listen to his heartbeat.
To your question, I witnessed a lethal injection execution in Nevada several years ago, and by comparison, that one took roughly 18 minutes, and it was about as exciting. Really, what happened was the person essentially fell asleep, and I would say by comparison, this seems to be, boy, a lot quicker and a lot more exacting, and perhaps more fitting to the crime that he committed.
He had the noose put on him. Was he still strapped to the board, or was he eventually?
He was on
So the entire time when he hung, a board was hooked on him.
We only saw him for 30 seconds.
We were told that he needed
At
to
the
be,
most.
that he needed to
He
be
couldn't
on the
stand
board
up?
to support him, that he could not stand up on his own. That's why the collapsible board was put on, why it was put on the collapsible board. Is that he couldn't physically stand up himself. You know, you have
He
to
couldn't
stand
make
there.
the walk from the
Right.
holding cell to the gallows chamber.
I mean, I was fairly weak-legged myself, sort of anticipation walking over there, so I was just watching. So, who knows?
To clarify what you said earlier, there were no sedatives used before.
That's correct.
Belcher, did you happen to find out about the knives or this contraband?
That will be investigated and reviewed, and there'll be an opportunity to address that starting tomorrow. May I refer you to Mary Christensen here at the institution for the follow-up on that. That is a secondary priority to yesterday and this morning.
Can you tell what specific?
I'm not aware of the specific nature and definition of what was found. It was contraband in Mr. Campbell's cell.
Do you know if he mailed any or stamped or wrote any letters and who they were to and if they are going to be mailed?
He did not use the writing materials, and there was no correspondence to be mailed.
Has he been eating regularly up until today? He declined that last meal. He hasn't been on like a hunger strike or anything.
No, he's not. And he has been eating regularly, yes.